here.
And in the meanwhile, the recording is already started. Thanks, Antonin, and we can go.
Excellent. Thank you. I share working correctly for everyone?
Yep, looks good.
Excellent. So what I wanted to focus on this morning is one, to talk about what's motivating the introduction of some development process here, and then walk you through what a typical life cycle of an issue in PR can be in terms of us getting a submission and going through the triage and all the things that accompany it. And then finally, to introduce you to some additional labels that I plan to add to the GitHub repository once we all agree that this is going to be useful for the project going forward. So to motivation first, we are just a fairly young and new project, but we are going to be very ambitious over the next year. And with that ambition is going to come a lot of work, a lot of parallel work that I would like to be able to, for us to track as an overall project, so that we can better gauge our velocity, be more transparent and predictable in our delivery of issues. The introduction of this is not in response to any problems thus far. Matter of fact, this is a very efficient project as I've seen up to this point. But there are, again, additional goals and ambitions that we want to achieve. And so introducing some additional formality into the way that we manage features and the way that we manage work will help us to move more quickly. And I'm going to take it upon myself to be primarily responsible and work with the maintainers on the project to ensure that issues are being triaged and categorized and handled appropriately. I have not submitted a PR. I wanted to do an initial review with you in my branch or my fork of the project before I did that. And so that's what we're going to spend this morning on. Any questions before I get started? Okay. So the first thing that I've done is introduced a directory in Docs. We can decide if this is the appropriate place to put this or not, but a directory that holds two additional documents. One is called dev process and one is called labels. Dev process is more of a narrative that's going to walk through a typical development process and the types of issues that may be submitted. I would say that these two documents are probably 85–90% complete. There are going to be some additional labels, and then we may have some additional narrative that we want to add to the process as we learn as a team what is the best and most efficient way for us to operate. The labels is basically going to just list a bunch of labels that can be applied to issues that will help us to categorize them. My goal at some point is for some of this to be automated and to use GitHub Actions as a mechanism for performing some of this triage. So that will be additional work that I will take upon myself and the rest of the team to get that automated. And then the process here is going to describe the overall process. So let's first off kind of start off with, what do we mean by this process? One of the things that we wanted to point out here in the overview is that the purpose of doing this again is a lightweight set of processes that will hopefully allow us to quickly optimize the way that we triage issues. Additionally, as the project goes forward and we begin to get more users, we're going to want to be able to respond very quickly to any type of support requests, and so this process will also begin to address that. When an issue is submitted or a PR, but most of the time we're going to be starting with an issue. I think the first thing that we need to do is just kind of label at a high level what type of issue that we're dealing with. Is it an API change? Is it a bug? Is it a cleanup? Is it a feature? Is it something we're deprecating, et cetera? once we have an idea on what type of change that we're dealing with, that will actually dictate the type of workflow. For example, if it's a bug and needs support from the community, we may handle that process differently to ensure that we get rapid response back to the user of the project, so that we can make sure that we're addressing any type of support needs that they have. In terms of labeling the kind of issue that it is, the project is very API driven, and that's just the nature of being in the Kubernetes ecosystem. And so we have called out any type of change that's going to directly impact the API as something fairly major, and we want to actually label it as an API change. We can talk about that if we think that's necessary or not. But a lot of the guidance that I've taken on putting this together actually comes directly from the Kubernetes project. Obviously, I'm not including every single label and kind from that project, but I've picked and selected the ones that I thought would be most beneficial to our project. Once you've selected a kind, the other thing that we want to do, and I've got some updates, like for example, I've got design documentation, whether it's an issue, for example. These types of kinds will help us to identify, who needs to pick up the document. And one of the ways that we know who needs to pick who needs to pick up that issue is what area that it's assigned to. Right now, since the project is fairly small, we manage that internally. Kind of in an implicit way, because there is a small core set of developers, and as we begin to grow our developer and number of developers participating and contributing to the project, the area assignment will help us to begin to know where to put the work for the issue, or where to assign the work for the issue. Additionally, from a project management perspective, as we're tracking feature completion, this also is going to give us some great ways to organize the boards so that we can see in any particular area of development of a functionality how that development is progressing, especially when it comes to things like wanting to integrate with particular cloud providers, particular OSs, particular or other projects, including Kubernetes itself. The size helps us to make an estimate. I don't want to be like, hardcore on, hey, you have to have the exact right size, right? This is just an estimate. This is only used for scoping out a set of features and issues that we want to select for a particular scope of work. So if we, as a team, decide to operate in almost more of a agile sprint type fashion, we can choose to do that. And this would, help during the issue triage and scope selection process as we groom the backlog. The triage tags help us to identify issues that are submitted from the community that may not have enough information, may be duplicative, may involve something where somebody needs immediate support, those types of things. And so we want to be able to take issues through triage before we identify them as ready to work. Additionally, we want to keep our backlog clean. All of the labels under lifecycle, for the most part, are meant to be automatically managed by a GitHub action. For example, if we find that there's the activity has stalled out on any given issue or PR, we want a way to actively denote that with a label to say, hey, nobody's looked at this issue in the last 90 days or the last 180 days. If an issue is active, we'll add an additional 30 days or 60 days, depending on that work that's being done on that issue. But again, even active issues, if work is not being completed or has been paused, then we want to mark those issues so that we keep the backlog fresh and relevant to the project. And then finally, we want to be able to prioritize issues, right? We're going to get a lot of great ideas coming into the project, but we want to determine, what we want to work on, now versus, what are important to the project, but maybe there's other things that need to be worked on in the meantime. I picked these priority labels directly out of the Kubernetes project. If we want to modify them or change them and use wording that is, better for the team, I'm all ears on this. This is just, throwing some paint up on the canvas, so that now that we have something to criticize and to start, to make this our process for the project. Again, just kind of looking at the labels that we've selected so far. Most of these labels are going to be human added at some point. I'd like to have some of these labels automatically added by GitHub Actions. But we basically have, things like what area work is designated for. This is going to be, functional areas primarily, but it'll also cover things like, for example, if we're working on something specific to AWS or Azure, GCP, or VMware, we can apply the appropriate area. We've got the kind labels, and we've got the lifecycle labels that we've already discussed, priority labels, size labels, triage labels. There are also some additional things, for example, whether or not this is a good first issue or help is going to be wanted. On these are known in just about every open source project hosted on GitHub or something equivalent. And so we also want to, honor those labels to help new contributors find where they can plug in and be useful immediately. Additionally, this is a section that probably needs some additional work, but I wanted to, currently we have it set up where approvals for PRs and such that are going to be merged into the project are coming from the set of core maintainers. As the project grows, we may want to follow a pattern where we begin to put owners files in various directories that more explicitly states which maintainers or which delegated owners are able to approve changes going into that area. I don't think the project is large enough yet to require something like that, but that's a direction that we definitely can go. So I'm going to pause here. I've gone through a bunch of stuff. And I just wanted to get some initial take on this, what your thoughts are. At initial glance, it looks fairly heavy, but that's just because I think there's a lot of areas for categorization, and the area categorization I'm primarily going to be using again for managing the roadmap and helping us to get some forward-looking visibility. Into future integration points, in future places that we want to be from a feature perspective. Open for questions.
So, coding, nothing is heavy for anybody who's ever used Jira. So, this might look heavy,
Fair
probably,
enough.
but if anyone has ever used Jira, everything will be light. My only feedback is that it is good. There is everything makes sense here. Every label that you have specified with all the context make perfect sense and are useful. The only thing that we should strike the balance between what are the labels that make sense now, what are the labels that to say that we can automate with GitHub Actions, because I think it's good to add some process, but we should not make issue triage somebody's day's job, because at the moment the community is not big enough to allow that. So you were talking about GitHub Actions. Have you already considered which labels could potentially be automated?
Absolutely. So the life cycles are the easiest ones, right? Because all I'm doing is tracking activity on an issue, right? So we just set up a GitHub action to make sure that we're showing, current activity on an issue, and if we're not, then we can, automatically apply lifecycle. That's the easiest one. For size labels on PRs, that's fairly easy. We can, anytime a PR is submitted, we can do, line count and automatically tag that PR as how large it is will help us to understand, how much time is going to be required to review that PR to merge it in. That's pretty easy. In terms of the triage labels, there's not a lot other than possibly needs information if we have templates that are driving PR and issue creation. If we're seeing things that are missing in those templates, we can do a quick check with a GitHub action just to say, hey, you didn't provide a use case, or you didn't provide for example, for like a bug, you didn't tell us the OS that it was on, the platform that you were on, the version that we're using, those types of things. As long as we have a very specific template, those would be useful in helping us catch, bug submissions that are not complete. The rest of it is fairly manual from an area perspective. We could identify certain areas of the code. For example, most of our API is going to be located in a particular directory, and if we see PRs that are modifying that area, things like API review or whatnot, could be automatically labeled. But again, I think I agree with you. That's probably not needed just yet, but it's a direction that we'll probably consider in the future coming months.
And this process will replace the labels that we currently have for GitHub issues and PRs, right? Antonin put together a very simple labeling system, so this is supposed to.
Yep, and that would need to, before I would add these labels, we definitely need to create a mapping as well on what the existing labels are to what they would map to here. And I would also want to get feedback from the team as if there's any existing process that is relying on those labels, right? I don't want to break anything by introducing new labels or changing labels. And so for the most part, we should be able to take both labels at the same time, right? Until we get the transition until the transition is complete. But I just need to be aware of, any processes that are relying on those labels. I don't want to break those.
I'm not aware of anything.
Neither am I. But Antonin is the expert here. So Antonin is not aware of anything. Rest assured there isn't anything.
Okay. So what I will do if, obviously I'm going to submit this PR to give everybody a chance to review it in more detail and offer some feedback. Once we've gone through that process, the next step then is going to be the boards. And the boards that I have currently in mind are and I haven't created these yet because I need these labels to actually be able to create those boards. But the boards that I have in mind currently are a board showing the current. Well, first off, before I get to that, do we have as a project a current notion of a sprint or a scoped execution period? Like where we've gone through and said, hey, we're going to select some features and then and work on those over a given period. Do we have a way that we're actually gauging and measuring our velocity as a team? And is that something we want to do?
When you start saying sprint, my brain starts thinking agile, and a place of my brain says, no, please.
Sure. Yeah.
But so basically, so far, our sprint is our release, if you want. The thing that I don't understand, now talking seriously, not joking, since we have fairly short release cycles, how do you think the concept of a sprint could work? Because in my experience, normally a sprint is something which is a part of a release cycle. Since the release cycle is already small, like 3 weeks, there isn't any meaningful time to have a productive sprint. So should we have sprints that span over several release cycles?
In that case, the sprint may be the release cycle. And I fully agree with that, right? I mean, if it's already short enough that what I want to do is set up a regular cadence where there's a known period that we are going to do backlog grooming together as a team. In that, we revisit and say, hey, we've got these new issues, and if we need to shuffle priorities on issues that are going to be accomplished during the next release, then that gives us kind of the cadence and select the time we're going to do that.
We pretty much do that every week at the community meeting, right? We always set aside 10 minutes to do that. Usually.
Okay. And we can do that intra release as well, like you said, or right now I think we're trying to move to. So that's another interesting thing. If we're going to move the community meeting to once every 2 weeks, but our release cycle is happening once every 3 weeks, do we want to align that better? Especially if we're doing backlog review and trying to reprioritize issues.
Yeah, why not? I mean, yes, it's surely good to have probably a retrospective every time we release, and then then I really don't know how that will work with the cadence of the weekly team meeting, but this is something that we can also discuss on the mailing list. We don't have to decide now. Also, the release cycle so far has been, I'm saying 3 weeks because it happened roughly every 3 weeks, but I don't think that we have a rule that we have to release every 3 weeks. If we want to make it more regular, we can say maybe 4 weeks or
I think
5.
we've been doing 4 weeks actually. Like
4 weeks.
that's something for last week.
Yeah, probably we did 3 only between
Only
the
the
first
first
time.
time.
Yeah, only the first time. So it's if it's 4 weeks, we keep meeting every 2 weeks, and every other
Perfect.
meeting we do a retrospective and we realign priorities.
I think that's a great strategy. I just want to make sure that we have some type of a bound on the release, which we have up to this point, so that we can appropriately scope and have an understanding of when a code freeze is going to take place for a release.
Oh, right, code freeze. So you mean code freeze, branching out, freezing requirements, and going through all the process, right?
So that we have a predictable, stable release,
We have never
process.
done this. We have never
Okay.
done this so far. We've been releasing off master. Is that right,
Okay.
Adnan? Yes, we have always been releasing off master, right?
Yeah, we do create a new branch for the release, but we really do it at the time of the release and not.
Yeah, that's right.
The idea was to use that branch to like bug fixes releases, but so far we've only done one bug fix release.
Okay.
So we do create a separate branch, but I usually pull it at the time of the release, and then the idea was we can use it to do bug fix releases if we need to.
So instead, Cody, your idea would be to have, let's say that imagine it is 4 weeks, the release cycle, have 3 weeks of active development, then code freeze, and the last week is dedicated to the release and planning for the next release.
We're a small enough project, right? Again, we're not dealing with all of the merge pains coming in from a bunch of different sub projects, right? Like what Kubernetes would deal with. And so it's much more important to have kind of this code slush, code freeze period. I think that if we had, the last week, it was more of a code slush or, maybe not a total freeze, but at least we've already branched and now we're marching towards that release. So we're trying to say no new feature work, right? Let's try to, or no new feature introduction. Let's try to clean and tidy up the existing features that we're working on in preparation for that release. Again, we want to maintain agility here. If we don't need an entire week to do that, and we come to find out, hey, we only need 2 or 3 days to do that, and let's just take 2 or 3 days to do that. Don't be rigid about it yet.
It depends on what we need, how much time we need for assessing the stability of the branch that we are cutting. So far,
Right.
of course, we don't need to run all the amount of tests and combos that Kubernetes is running. And for us, it will be the time needed for running a full set of conformance tests, because that's what we have at the moment. So technically, 1 day will be enough. Let's make it 2, maybe at the time of code freeze. But the logic, I don't know if it has to be. I mean, the logic will be that we branch out, and then on the release branch, we do a code freeze, and then development continues on master, right, Cody? That's the approach?
Correct. So we would, a week before release, we would branch and say, this is going to be the release branch, so that if there was other longer term things that were being developed on master, those are not going to impact the release branch. and then we basically tidy up anything. And then after the release, everything in the release branch gets merged back into master, to backport any of those changes back to the main branch.
Yeah, I'm a bit opposed to do that unless there is an actual need, because it's kind of like in the absence of automation, like it gets a bit tedious to do. Like let's say you have a bug that you also really need on master because it's blocking some other developments, and you have to like merge it both in the release branch and the master branch like right away before the actual release. And so in my experience, like until we have like automation to actually mark those fixes that need to go in both branches, and then you have a bot actually opening the pull request for you, I'd rather not do that, basically.
That's a good point, Anton. We're small enough. Yeah, we're small enough. I'm fine with that right now. I mean,
I'm sure we'll have it at some point, but for example, at this stage,
sure,
the tests we actually run on a release are actually the tests we run like as part of continuous development, right? We just run a subset of community tests and network policy tests and our own end-to-end tests. We don't do any extensive testing for a release candidate. So when you do that, I agree that having a freeze makes perfect sense. But until then,
yeah, I will second what Antonio said.
Okay, I think that sounds like a perfectly sound approach for now, and we'll make sure and monitor how easy it is to track those changes as we're getting closer to releases, and if we may need to make more of an automation change later on, we certainly can do that.
I think as we start introducing more automation, and we should definitely start with labels and triage, then we can become more ambitious and then streamline and optimize that release process. But I think we should start with make it progressive. And going back to issue triage, and you talk a lot about GitHub Actions. But I think projects like Kubernetes tend to do that with bots, right? There is like the fetch tab bot for a lifecycle, and I think they have like the pro bot for assignment and triage.
Yeah.
So is there a difference between GitHub Actions and
you can use GitHub Actions to basically act as bots. So what those bots are doing, I'll give you an example. If we want to have certain types of actions occur in response to comments that have like a /action command in it, right? So in Kubernetes, for example, if I want to assign something, or if I want to perform some action, a lot of times I do it within the comment of a PR, like a /LGTM as a really good one, right? That will then mark an issue as looks good to me by an approver or a designated code owner. Those things can be serviced by a GitHub action, because a GitHub action is just going to plug into the event stream of GitHub and monitor comments and pull requests and issue submissions, those types of things, and then execute whatever custom code we want to execute based on that, and that basically becomes our bot. The nice thing about GitHub Actions is we don't have to write a separate server to sit here and monitor this event stream, right, and respond back via it's all built right into GitHub, which makes it a lot easier.
Is there anything we cannot do with GitHub Actions?
I don't have an answer to that. When we cross that bridge, I'll take a look.
They're stateless, but basically, I don't think there is anything that in what you presented. I don't think there is anything that we couldn't do. Really.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that we're doing that is requiring like a stateful monitoring of the project. And the other thing is everything that we're dealing with right now is in one repo, right? We're not dealing with cross repo monitoring and basically looking for merge conflicts and those types of things that are going to occur as you would get in a larger project. I think since everything is contained to one repo, GitHub Actions should be sufficient for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, I have no doubt that we can do many things with GitHub Actions. There are some things I will not let GitHub Actions do. I mean, for instance, for me, the area should be manual, where there is the guy that does the triage knows exactly who's the expert for that area, and it's a way of assigning. It's a way of saying, hey, Antonin, this is for you. Jean-June, this is for you. Kobe, this is for you. And many patches have also multiple areas. So
Exactly.
automating that is possible, but we will have a lot of false positive and false negatives probably. And in that case, having the automated action could be worse than doing it manual. I don't know if you.
I agree.
Are you
No,
talking specifically about PRs, like assigning a PR based on which code has changed?
Yeah, basically, the idea will be that a GitHub action will look at the diff, look at the paths of the files that have changes and calculate the areas. In that case, I think that at least
we're going to
for
spend more
the
time writing the matching code than we
That's
are
right, that's
actually
right.
just assigning the area.
That's right.
What Kubernetes does in the only really automation they do around PR assignment is on reviews, and they have a fairly complicated process for looking at the history of a code change and like who owned different modifications of that piece of code, and they go back up through the tree looking for that. I don't think we need anything of that nature. And if we do get to a point where we need it, we'll just borrow the code from Kubernetes, right?
Yes.
We're not going to reinvent that wheel.
Yeah.
So
as long as the project has like 6 or 7 contributors, it's not needed.
exactly. Yeah, that's not needed here.
So even for the labels, if we need some manual process to assign the labels, I'm thinking, could we just start from a short list? I don't look at the whole list, but it looks a little long. I'm not sure it will create some manual efforts if we have to use all these labels.
Let's take this approach. I'll create the labels. If we miss some of the labels at the beginning, that's okay. Let's see what the burden is, and also remember that I'm going to be monitoring this repository much more closely as well. And so in my role, I will try to pick up, some of the burden that the labels provide. Salvatore said this is not somebody's day job, but in essence, this is part of my day job, right? To make sure that these get appropriately classified and categorized. And so
if you want
I'll
to
take
make it
some
your
of that
day
burden.
job, take it.
Well, it's not my day job, but this is something that's going to immensely help me to be able to report out on our progress and to give an overall management view of how we're progressing. And so if you don't assign labels, I'm going to be reviewing all of the issues as they come in, and if I see that there's a label missing or whatnot, I can definitely assign that label.
Yes, that sounds great. But I'm still thinking at least Kudu has some bigger categories. I mean, if someone except you need to assign the label,
I see what you're saying. So we'll create a short list, right, to say, hey, these are what I would consider the essential labels that we need to have on every issue, and then all the others will, if it be optional for the time being. Mm-hmm. And if you want to take the time to go assign those, great. If I come along and review and triage those issues coming in, I can add some additional labels. But I'll at least try to create a short list. That's great feedback, Ginger. I'll create a short list of the labels that I think are essential.
Yeah, I think when Salvatore said Jira is more heavier actually. At least for me, I don't really watch Jira a lot. I think it's many managers' job for webmail. So I'm not sure every developer is part of like the process to do very fine good labels or whatever.
Right. Other questions? So what I was alluding to earlier, the only thing I didn't cover yet are the boards. Antonin, you'd mentioned that. So again, on the boards, what I'm trying to accomplish there is I want to show within the current release what things that we've scheduled and are in progress, so we at least have an idea on the completion of the current release. I also want to have a board showing where we stand in various functional areas in terms of a feature completeness of the product or of our roadmap. And then finally, I want to have a board showing how the various contributors are loaded in terms of, if Antonin's getting assigned, 80% of the issues based on area or whatever, I want to be able to have at least a board that gives us some visual indication of the issue load being carried by the different contributors on the team.
In the case of
and I can manage some of that automatically. Do what?
No, I just saying for Antonio, I think you can definitely assume he can do more than you or other guys.
Yeah, I think that, the normal numbers should be Antonin 80%. Everybody else gets the rest.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And then if we come up with some other boards that are useful for us, for example, I'll probably have a board showing life cycle of like which issues have come up as stale, or rotten. Those are going to be some really useful things for us to take a look at and a peek at every so often, just so that we can keep track of that. So that's it right now. Once we get these labels, then I can actually synthesize the boards from that information. So without any other comments, I will make that change, Jinjin, in terms of the essential list of labels, and then submit a PR.
So what is the first change that's going to be deployed? The labels?
The first change that I will deploy is these two documents, and then once these documents are merged into the project, I will then create the labels, because the labels is the creation of the labels is a management activity, and it's not dictated by a PR process.
Mm. And as we start identifying issues for the next release 0.4, what is any what changes completely? Anything different?
So that's going to be a conversation I'm going to be prepared to speak on tomorrow, and we'll go through and identify what issues we want to work as a team.
Tomorrow, you mean next meeting, or?
Yes, next meeting, but I think we're going to have some additional conversations one-on-one with different developers on the roadmap.
Okay.
So we can put together a roadmap that can be discussed at our next community meeting.
Okay.
So on a related note, I was wondering if you guys have thought about any sort of way for proposals. Like today, what we do is like we end up for any feature proposals, we end up just creating a Google Doc with some form or structure, and then it's linked to the issue, and want to standardize a way for proposals, because I assume that there will be a lot more proposals coming in, and a way for us to be able to review them. And
so other projects have created a design folder that basically holds various markdowns for designs that are going to encompass more than one issue, or are going to be kind of larger architectural questions that need to be debated and decided by the community. I'm not opposed to creating a design folder to hold those markdowns and then doing an issue link to those. I think that there should always be an issue associated with any type of a new proposal coming in, or a new design coming in. But I just want to make sure that we have a distinction between design and feature, right? Like a feature is kind of like a unit of work that, we can actually classify work around, where design has to do more with the architecture on how we arrive at a piece of work. Does that make sense?
Okay, I just wanted to bring that up, because today I see Google Docs flying around. So, and even when we are proposing something, I would like to see if there's some format that I can follow, and then it will be easier for every other reviewer to also go through it and provide feedback.
And this is, I love feedback from the team on this, right? I'm not opposed to Google Docs. The question I have is, do we want to use Google Docs to actually develop those designs, or do we want to, use Markdown and put it all in the repo and kind of go through the PR process? The nice thing about the PR process is we capture comments and everything kind of all in one place. as the design as being developed. Unfortunately, Markdown is not going to give you the amount of document editing and things like that you might get from a Google Docs. What is the team's thoughts about that?
I think that everything that it's accessible to everyone for free and easy for commenting and trading comments, it's good.
Okay. So yeah, we don't want to rule out any type of productivity tool that's useful.
And follow up to my observation. Is Google Docs freely available in China?
I guess not for everyone, but I mean, if you are being company like Webmail, and probably have access. But I mean, individual developers, maybe it's not the case for everyone. But I think so far, I don't know. What do you guys think? If you want to include all the potential.
I mean, I'm asking because we know that we already have contributors in China, and China is a very active area generally in the Kubernetes ecosystem. I am afraid that using Google Docs might create a barrier, but hey, we need to start from somewhere. So we can start with Google Docs, and when we figure out a better solution, we can do that. Yeah. I remember that in the past, we have used Gerrit for that, just because we were working on OpenStack projects and they were using Gerrit for everything. It was kind of okay, but writing a text document, reviewing text documents, plain text documents for everything might be a little bit tiring. So that is another option anyway. But in my opinion, it's okay to start with Google Docs, and then if we want to find an alternative which is more accessible, we'll do that.
It's also easier to embed some diagrams and tables and
yes.
Agreed.
And
tables are fine in Markdown, but diagrams are.
In the future, and this means in the future when we will have a lot of feature proposals for Antrea, we will probably end up adopting the same approach as Kubernetes, the CAP, where basically you use GitHub reviews for reviewing design themselves. And basically it's Markdown. You use the reviewing system for commenting, and basically you can write fairly complex documents using Markdown.
I think the one big advantage of that is that you keep a trace of those things, whereas a Google Doc might
eventually gets lost
because the guy moves on or cleans up his Google Drive.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I also feel like it's probably a little bit an overkill creating a repository just for proposals at the moment, or even or even a directory for proposals. I don't know, seems like an overkill at the moment.
Why don't we take this approach? I mean, proposals are not all going to make it through, right? So we may end up rejecting them. So initially, create it using your favorite productivity tool. If it's Google Docs, that's great. Once we get to more of an agreement by the team that, hey, this looks good, this is the design that we want to go, then we can migrate that into a Markdown or whatever we need to do. That's not going to be a hard thing to do.
Okay, we can think about it. Yeah, we can. I mean, I understand the point. I understand, the value in your proposal is that this will allow us to also get documentation for free. The problem is that the actual implementation often ends up being different from the initial design, so you need to keep them in sync.
Agreed.
Okay, can we use the last 10 minutes or so to close on the release 0.3?
Sure. Are you going to share your screen, Antoine? Because at the moment I have too many tabs open on my screen, and
yeah, I can share.
Yeah.
Share. Here we go. So there are only like 5 more issues tagged with 0.3.0 release. We abandoned a few already, like no NCAP proposal. We postponed it. We punted it to the next release. So I think we should just go over those and see what we're able to make like today, to close on today or tomorrow, basically, and the rest we should punt it to the next release. Janjan, do you want to start with the IPsec? Do you know what's keeping this issue open?
Sure, I should update it. Sorry, I forgot to do that. Basically, the most code is in. I still plan to add documentation, at least starting from user doc, like how to deploy. Maybe it's not needed to be a 0.3 branch. But anyway, I hope to finish the documentation before resolve issues. Another thing I mentioned before that I cannot get it to work with other town types except GRE. I'm still looking into that, but maybe it can be due to openly switch or Linux kernel or whatever. I'm not sure it can be resolved in short time. So yeah, that's the status for that.
So you have one open PR to restrict the tunnel type to GRE, and we should merge that before the release. And then you may open a documentation PR, but it's unclear whether we're going to have time to merge it before the
right.
Okay. So the next one is Prometheus. I think that Kobe has opened a PR for this. It seems unlikely that we're going to merge it today or tomorrow. So I think we should punt it to the next release unless someone has an objection.
Yeah, I think it makes sense as I'm kind of still testing like how it would work with service discovery, etc. The Prometheus service discovery. So
it's a good topic for next week's meeting, actually, if you could do a walkthrough of your PR.
Yep. Okay.
And the other thing to consider too is things like Prometheus Matrix are a form of API, and so we may want to get an overall kind of what is going to be our approach to a metrics API, because that's going to be long-lived.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Let me go back to open a new tab here. Okay, next is expose logs publicly for Jenkins CI job. So this is not needed for the release. I just tagged it with this release because to give us like a timeline, basically. At this stage, so for the background, we run those Jenkins CI jobs to run like community tests and community conformance and network policy tests on every PR. And at this stage, we report the status back to GitHub. If your job fails, at this time, it's impossible for you to, for a contributor to actually visualize the logs and even see which test exactly failed. And that's because those jobs are run on VMware servers, which are not like exposed publicly. There is no like public HTTP endpoint for you to visualize the logs. So some contributors in China are working on this from some contributors from VMware, but we're still having like issues like opening up a port and letting people visualize the logs. So it's not available right now. I think we're making progress. I think the team is also looking into running this test on a public cloud instead of an internal test bed. So hopefully we'll have an update soon, but this is not done yet. So I'm gonna remove it from the release. The next two issues are about the Antrea CLI. So we have the Antrea CLI merged in already, so it's going to be part of the release. We don't really have any useful commands at this stage, and I think if we have 5 minutes left, yes, I wanted to bring an issue up here and see what people think. So the plan was to start distributing like the NCTL CLI binaries as part of the release. If I go to the release tab, where is the release tab? If I go to the release tab here, you'll see that for each release, we have been uploading the Antrea YAML. And that's the link that people can use to deploy Antrea directly with kubectl. So the plan starting with this release was to also upload like the CLI binaries for different architectures so that people can just download it directly like they can download kubectl. The problem at this stage is we really don't have any useful commands that the CLI can run. There is an open PR. I'm going to show you. there is an open PR, this one that Oppo is going to be merged soon, that lets you like collect information about the health of the agent. But one issue is that at this moment, the only way to run this command is to run the CLI directly from within the agent pod, because it's using a Unix domain socket, and there is no like HTTP endpoint which is open outside the cluster. So basically,
So
no point in distributing the binaries at this stage, because the only useful command you can run, you have to run it from within the pod, and the CLI binary is already part of the Antrea container image, so you already have the.
It's only
I
one
agree.
command you can do
I agree.
remotely for controller. That is to get a version. That one you can run the uncut
Yeah.
remotely.
Basically getting the version, so not super useful. So I don't know if we really need to distribute binaries as part of this release, or if we just wait until the next release. And
I think you wait till you have functionality that's useful to the consumer.
And that gives us time to figure out how to automate like the generation of the binaries for different architectures and different OSs. And like, yeah, basically I'd rather not do that now. I agree with what Cody said.
Quick question: is there when we're releasing those binaries, are they incorporating any additional libraries or things that we need to consider from a licensing perspective? Are we good in that perspective?
I'm not the expert here, so I don't know how it works for Go binaries, right? Because those are self-contained binaries. They don't actually link, obviously, like you to dynamic libraries like.
Right, if they're statically linked, that's what I'm just making sure that we've got all the appropriate licensing issues covered there. If they're dynamically linked, it's probably not an issue.
So is it like specific to the CLI? It's not really specific to the CLI, right?
No, this is just in general, right?
Stuff, right?
So that's something I may put on my queue of things to take a look at over the next 2 weeks, is just kind of see where we are from a licensing perspective as well.
So I think that's a more general review of the dependencies in the go.mod file and see if we're good with all
Correct. And that also has to do with some due diligence we have for some upcoming things that we would like to do potentially with the CNCF. So
yeah, sounds good. Okay, so you can take that action item, right? And so yeah, so do I hear consensus that there is no need to distribute the NCTL binaries?
Yes, I mean, if the binary, if it's something that no user can possibly leverage, so why we should bother distributing it?
I mean, it's just going to confuse people, and it kind of ties back to the last issue here that was tagged with 0.3, which is like there is no user-facing documentation of the CLI right now. So the CLI has those basically things work differently based on whether you're running the CLI from within the agent pod or from outside the cluster. Not everything is available, and so that may be confusing to some users. So I think we should get that documentation in place before we start distributing the binaries and advertising the CLI. But we have the framework, so developers are free to start adding comments, I guess. Okay, so that was all for me. So basically those 4 enhancement issues here will be punted to the next release, and the first issue, Gengen has a pending PR and we'll be adding documentation as well. Maybe that can probably make it, at least the PRs, not the documentation, can make it into the release.
Perfect. Okay, I think that it's time for open discussion. Anything else that you would like to bring up for discussion today?
So I had an update on the name port support. Yesterday we pushed patches, or like over the last week we pushed some patches. There are 2 open PRs for them, one on the controller side, one on the agent side. So I've tested the controller, and Chan has also tested the controller side, and his agent side is built on top of it. And when I last spoke to him yesterday night, he said that he was going to end-to-end test today, or rather in his Beijing time, to do an end-to-end test with both the patches. And so yeah, they are ready for review. So feel free to leave comments. I know Junjun has been involved in some of the discussion on the API changes or the group changes. So the implementation is based on that. I've linked a Google Doc as well to the issue to document the changes. So yeah, that's I can provide a better update after talking to Chan tonight. And but that's ready for review. And it's not a hacky approach. It does the name code support in a proper way instead of a limited support. That's it.
Thanks, Abhishek. All right, and I don't have any update on DualStack. Unfortunately, it was a busy weekend and no progress could be made. The only thing that I wanted to mention is that there's been an update on the mailing list regarding upstream DualStack changes. And this is a mail on the KTS SIG network mailing list. It seems that the update is quite relevant to Antrea as well. So we should probably all have a look as well and see and take stock of the changes that are happening upstream. And say that, I think that you're just waiting for me to say the meeting is over, go in peace, and talk to you in 2 weeks' time, or should we meet next week?
Let's go ahead and schedule next week because we're still kind of going through some house cleaning type things.
Okay.
And I think we can probably get to more of a 2-week cadence after next week. Would everybody be okay with that?
Sounds good. I'm okay.
Yeah, let's see how it goes. We keep wanting to
Great.
do that, and then things keep coming up.
Eventually, I think we will once we have some more of these processes worked out. But I think it'd be good to go ahead and meet next week again.
All right. Cool.
Thanks for everybody's time.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.